In the quiet stillness of the primate hall, a newborn rested in yellow, unaware of the towering gorilla bowing solemnly behind glass. Visitors slowed their pace, sensing an unusual calm as the great ape lowered her head again toward the tiny child below her. The gorilla's deep eyes shimmered with something unspoken, her breath misting the barrier, as though reaching through it gently. The baby let out a small, curious sound, and the gorilla responded with another slow bow, almost ceremonial in its rhythm. Keepers nearby exchanged startled glances, for this powerful creature rarely showed such tender restraint toward any visitor. A quiet tension thickened the air, pulling more onlookers into a moment that felt heavier than its peaceful appearance. Nothing in the enclosure stirred except her measured movements, each bow carrying weight that seemed rooted in old sorrow. Straw rustled softly as she leaned close again, lowering her head with a reverence that silenced even the smallest whispers. Parents lifted phones hesitantly, unsure whether they witnessed a sweet coincidence or something far more significant unfolding. The baby's gentle gurgle floated upward, and the gorilla's shoulders quivered as she bowed deeper than she ever had before. A keeper stepped nearer, his pulse quickening, knowing he had never seen this creature express such raw, aching stillness. And in that thick quiet, a single thought rippled through the crowd. What loss or memory could draw such grief from her? Whispers rippled through the crowd as the gorilla's gaze remained locked on the infant, her bowing now slower, almost trembling. The keepers radioed one another, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe the strange tenderness unfolding before them. A soft groan rose from the gorilla's chest, a sound not of threat but of longing, carrying echoes of stories no one yet knew. The baby blinked up at the massive figure, and for a breathless moment it seemed as if time itself had paused watching them. A handler stepped closer to the window, noticing the gorilla's hands trembling lightly as they rested on the straw below. Her usual commanding posture had melted into something fragile, almost vulnerable, drawing concern from those who knew her best. Visitors began recording, some in awe, others uneasy, wondering why such a powerful creature showed such heartbreaking reverence. The hall's low lighting flickered gently, casting shifting shadows over her bowed form, deepening the mystery of her behavior. The keeper closest to the scene swallowed hard, recognizing the strange sound she made, one he had heard only once before. The baby stretched a tiny arm upward, and the gorilla responded with a deeper bow, eyes squeezed shut as if in silent prayer. Parents held their children close, sensing a story behind this moment, one written long before today's quiet encounter. Something in the air grew heavier still, a feeling that this was not merely fascination, but a reunion with a ghost of memory. The lead primate specialist finally arrived, hurrying down the corridor, worry etched across her face as she joined the crowd. She studied the gorilla's repeated bowing, her breath catching as a buried recollection surfaced, chilling her to the bone. This was behavior the gorilla had displayed only once, years ago, after a loss that had shaken the entire caretaking team. The specialist knelt, observing every twitch of the gorilla's shoulders, noting how grief shaped each motion with familiar weight. The gorilla lifted her face briefly, eyes glossy, then bowed again, as if acknowledging a pain the baby unknowingly stirred. Guests fell silent as the specialist whispered to the nearest keeper, her voice tight with emotion and dawning certainty. She watched the baby's relaxed breathing and saw how the gorilla followed each exhale with a mournful bow of submission. Something about the infant's size, posture, and fragile presence was pulling the gorilla into a memory she could not escape. The specialist placed her hand on the glass, and the gorilla looked up, eyes pleading as though asking for permission to grieve. A low rumble escaped the gorilla's chest. Not anger, but a broken lullaby she had once used to soothe a baby of her own. Parents gasped softly as they realized they were witnessing a creature mourning through the mirror of another's child. And with every bow, the truth grew clearer. The gorilla was not fascinated by the baby. She was remembering her lost one. The specialist signaled for the crowd to step back slightly, fearing the intensity of the moment might overwhelm the gorilla. Yet the giant ape did not react with agitation. Instead, she pressed her forehead gently against the glass, bowing once more. Her breathing deepened, heavy with the weight of years, each exhale fogging the surface and blurring her sorrow-shaped reflection. The baby squirmed softly in her parents' arms, and the gorilla followed the motion with heartbreaking attentiveness. Visitors stood frozen, sensing that even the smallest sound might fracture the fragile emotional bridge forming in the hall. The specialist whispered details to the others. The gorilla had lost her infant unexpectedly, a tragedy kept quiet from the public. This was the first time she had seen a human baby since then, and her reaction was not anger, but a mourning ritual resurfacing. The gorilla lifted a handful of straw and let it fall slowly, a gesture identical to the one she made when she said goodbye. Her shoulders shook as she bowed again, each movement a silent plea for understanding from the tiny life before her. Tears pricked the eyes of witnesses as they realized they were watching grief take shape in a creature who remembered too much. The baby let out a tiny laugh, unaware of the aching memory his presence revived in the sorrowful guardian behind the glass. And as the gorilla lowered herself yet again, the hall seemed to pulse with a single shared heartbeat filled with compassion. The specialist approached the glass once more, murmuring the gorilla's name softly, grounding her in the present with care. The gorilla lifted her eyes, blinking slowly, torn between the memory of her own infant and the living one before her now. Her hands rested flat on the straw, fingers curled slightly as if resisting the instinct to cradle what she could not reach. The keepers exchanged somber looks, remembering the long nights spent comforting her when loss had fractured her spirit. Guests watched breathlessly as the gorilla straightened for a moment, only to bow again deeper than she had all afternoon. The baby's parent stepped closer, gently rocking the child, hoping the calm movement might ease the creature's trembling sorrow. The gorilla's gaze followed every sway, her eyes softening, her breath slowing as though the rhythm soothed her wounded heart. A hush settled as she pressed her palm to the glass, aligning it perfectly with the baby's tiny silhouette below it. For a fleeting second, it looked as though she was offering a blessing, or perhaps a final goodbye, to the child she once had. The specialist placed her palm opposite the gorilla's, whispering reassurances that she was safe, seen, and not alone anymore. Visitors felt their chests tighten as they realized the gorilla wasn't just bowing. She was trying to honor a memory she feared losing. And in that suspended moment, the hall held a grief so profound that even the silence seemed to bow with her. The gorilla slowly lifted her head, her eyes glistening as though she were searching the baby's tiny features for something familiar. Keepers held their breath, sensing she was reaching a fragile threshold where memory and reality blurred into painful unity. The baby yawned softly, and the gorilla froze, her entire massive form trembling with a recognition too deep to ignore. The specialist whispered that the gorilla's own infant used to make that exact sound, a detail she had never forgotten. Visitors felt a collective shiver as the gorilla bowed again, but this time the gesture carried raw desperation within it. Her hands curled inward, palms trembling on the straw, as though resisting a powerful instinct to cradle the child she saw. The baby's parent shifted gently, and the gorilla followed every motion, her eyes widening as if reliving a sacred memory. A haunting stillness fell over the hall, broken only by the faint rustle of straw beneath her trembling arms. The specialist stepped closer, urging the gorilla softly to breathe, to stay grounded, knowing past grief could consume her. But the gorilla continued bowing, each motion deeper, heavier, until it seemed her heart might burst through the glass. A faint murmur escaped her, thick with longing, echoing like a mother humming to a child she could no longer hold. And as the baby blinked up at her, the room understood. This was not fascination. This was recognition. The baby reached out with a tiny hand, fingers curling in air just inches from the glass where the gorilla pressed her forehead. The gesture made her inhale sharply, a sound so human in its ache that it silenced even the softest whisper around her. Her eyes softened into deep pools of emotion, reflecting a longing that had slept quietly until this moment awakened it. Keepers exchanged urgent glances, worried the memory of her loss might spiral into behavior born of overwhelming grief. But the gorilla remained calm, her massive body trembling only with emotion, not agitation, as she lowered herself again. The baby cooed softly, and her entire posture shifted, as if the simple sound reached the wounded place she guarded within. A warmth flickered behind her eyes, a fragile spark suggesting the baby's presence was soothing the very ache it triggered. The specialist observed closely, noting how the gorilla's breathing steadied each time the infant's gentle noises filled the hall. Visitors felt tears rise as they witnessed grief shifting into something softer, longing slowly weaving itself into healing. The gorilla lifted a piece of straw and held it delicately, mimicking the way she once offered comfort to her lost infant. The baby's parent smiled nervously, sensing the strange connection forming, a bridge built from sorrow and innocence both. And with a final tender bow, the gorilla acknowledged the tiny life before her, as though thanking him for easing her pain. The gorilla shifted closer to the glass, her breath fogging the surface as she leaned in with reverence that felt ceremonial. The specialist murmured softly, describing how this behavior mirrored the final moments she spent with her own newborn years ago. Visitors pressed hands to their mouths, feeling the weight of a story they had never known unfolding in quiet rawness. The baby wriggled in his parents' arms, and the gorilla's eyes followed each movement with a gentle, maternal tenderness. Her massive hand lifted, palm outward, hovering inches from the glass as if offering a silent promise she could never fulfill. The straw beneath her rustled as she sank lower, bowing in a posture that looked less like grief and more like devotion. A faint rumble vibrated from her chest, a soothing tone she once used to calm her newborn, echoing through the hall's stillness. The specialist swallowed hard, recognizing the sound, knowing it was the first time the gorilla had made it since her tragic loss. Visitors stood transfixed as her trembling fingers traced invisible shapes on the glass, mimicking the outline of a tiny form. The baby's small laugh bubbled into the air, lighting the space with innocence that melted the heaviness surrounding her. For the first time, the gorilla's posture lifted slightly, as though the child's joy seeped into the fractures of her spirit. And as she gazed at him with quiet awe, the room felt the shift. Grief was beginning to transform into something gentler. The specialist spoke softly to the keepers, deciding it was safe to let the moment continue, trusting the gorilla's calm. The gorilla sat upright, her shoulders rising slowly, as though shedding layers of sorrow that had weighed her down for years. The baby's parent stepped a bit closer, cradling the child carefully, allowing the gorilla a clearer view through the glass. The gorilla's eyes widened with tenderness, and she bowed once more. But this time the gesture carried gratitude, not grief. Visitors exchanged looks of awe as they sensed she was honoring the infant, acknowledging the healing he unknowingly offered. A soft hum filled the hall as she exhaled, a release of pain, long held tight, drifting away like dust in warm sunlight. The baby blinked up with wide curiosity, and the gorilla lifted her palm to the glass, steady and calm, no longer trembling. The specialist watched the transformation, tears gathering as she realized the gorilla was reclaiming a part of herself today. The hall felt warmer somehow, as though the presence of the child had coaxed forgotten warmth back into the gorilla's heart. The baby cooed again, and the gorilla responded with a gentle nod, a gesture so human in its softness that it stunned the crowd. Her bow this time was slow, deliberate, a silent thank you offered to the tiny life who stirred both sorrow and healing. And as she rose again, the heaviness that once surrounded her seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet, fragile peace. The gorilla finally stepped back from the glass, her movements calm and fluid, no longer burdened by the memories that haunted her. She glanced one last time at the infant, her dark eyes glimmering with acceptance rather than the pain that first consumed her. The baby smiled sleepily, unaware of the healing he had sparked deep within a creature who carried grief heavier than words. Keepers relaxed their tense shoulders, relieved to see her spirit settling gently into a place of newfound emotional balance. Visitors watched in hushed reverence as she turned to gather straw, shaping it with care, recreating a nest she once abandoned. The specialist realized this was symbolic, a sign that the gorilla was ready to let go and honor her past rather than relive it. She paused at the far end of the enclosure, glancing back with a soft rumble that resonated like a farewell blessing. The baby shifted in his parent's arms, eyes fluttering as though sensing the exchange of unspoken understanding between them. The hall's atmosphere lightened, its shadows softened, as though the entire space exhaled after witnessing her transformation. The gorilla settled into her newly formed nest, shoulders no longer shaking, her breath slow and steady, like a calm tide. Visitors drifted away quietly, carrying with them the powerful memory of a creature who mourned, remembered, and healed. And long after they left, the echo of that fragile connection lingered, a reminder of how grief can bow and love can rise again.